Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today, I want to talk about feelings and getting to know our own feelings. In my active addiction, I constantly ran from my feelings and tried to alter them through chemicals. I mean, that's what we do when we're using and when we're drinking, is trying to change the way we feel using chemicals. And what this does is create an environment where I don't even really know what I'm feeling. And that's not a good place to be, because it creates a situation where I'm basing my behavior off of things I don't really even understand and have no clue how to actually deal with. So I'm going to read a paragraph or two about this from Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart by Mark Epstein, and then talk a little bit about how the program of AA and other recovery programs do the same thing, but how the program of AA taught me how to really look a little further at my feelings and figure out what it was that was going on. So in the book, he says, "The interaction with my son reminded me of some of the most surprising encounters of my early years as a therapist with hospitalized patients. It was not unusual for me to find myself sitting alone with a newly admitted patient who seemed in total crisis, embroiled in intense feelings over which she seemed to have very little control. These young men or women, for they were usually young, would be filled with rage or sadness or fear, but upon getting to know them, I would discover that they were remarkably unaware of what they were feeling. They could act their feelings out, but they did not seem to know what they were. They were by no means crazy in the conventional sense of the word, but they seemed to have no idea of what was happening to them, of why they were starving themselves or cutting themselves or threatening suicide if left alone by their boyfriends or girlfriends. As I got to know these people better, I began to see that not only did they not know what they were feeling, but they had remarkably little idea of what feelings even were. They had no vocabulary for their emotions, reacting with fear every time certain physical or emotional sensations became prominent. It was as if they were phobic toward their own feelings. Only when they went back to the beginning and learned the basics of what emotions actually are, what we call mad, sad, and glad, could they develop the capacity to tolerate feelings." So, a couple of important ideas introduced here. One is the vocabulary for emotions and the idea of not understanding our emotions. So when I was going through steps for the first time for AA, a big part of step 4 is taking your fear inventory, writing down your fears, and really going through and identifying, the previous part of that step is identifying all your resentments in life. And the fear inventory is where you look at those resentments and say, well, what role did fear play in the feelings that I formed toward these people, places, or things that I'm resentful towards? And I found that fear played an enormous role in those kinds of feelings for me, and I had never thought about it. I found myself in the same case that the author talks about in this paragraph, where I had emotions related to people, places, and things that I'd encountered in life that were born out of fear, but I was not consciously aware of that relationship. And it wasn't until I put a vocabulary around what I was feeling, it wasn't until I identified the fear that was driving, the emotion that was driving the reactions that I was having toward those people, places, and things. It wasn't until I did that I started being able to counter some of those emotions. once I identified, for example, that my resentment toward an old teacher was based off of my fear of failure, then I could start to let go of that resentment as I deconstructed that fear and decided why I didn't need to have that moving forward in the future. Um, so really interesting to think about, because most of us don't. I think most of us feel like we are in touch with our emotions, and it turns out, if we really go through and take some time to try to categorize what we're feeling and try to break it down in the way, for example, that we do in step 4 in AA, I think a lot of us find that we're nowhere near as in touch as we thought we were. And it's important to start getting self-aware of our emotions, because it's only when we're self-aware of emotions that it becomes easier to tolerate those emotions. When I'm feeling disturbed about something and I can identify what that is, then, and why I feel that way, then it becomes much easier for me to tolerate that. It also places some finite boundaries around that feeling. I had an example of this recently. I was feeling overwhelmed. I had a lot of stuff going on in life, and I was feeling very overwhelmed. And in the past, in my active addiction, when I would get overwhelmed like that, I would develop extreme anxiety. I would pull away from. I would start isolating. I would lash out at people around me. I would withdraw. I had all these reactions related to feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed out, and I couldn't ever figure out how to get over those things. And so I started having some of these feelings yesterday, because there's just a lot going on in life, and it's just one of those times. And I was able to sit with that emotion and say, well, it's okay to feel this way right now, because this won't last forever. This is, my reaction to feeling a little out of control. And I know from the work I've done in the AA steps that I've got fear related to not being in control of things, and I need to practice letting go of that fear. I need to practice giving up control to the universe around me, and kind of saying, hey, I can only do what I can do. I can only take care of what I can take care of. And I've got to do that, take an active step to do that, and then tolerate whatever emotions are left over, knowing that they're temporary. Because the stressors that I was experiencing in life were also temporary. So once I could recognize that, then what in the past would have been this extremely overwhelming and long-lasting emotional turmoil, really, I was able to contain it. And I was able to go to a meeting last night, a recovery-based meeting last night, had a good conversation with someone I'm working with on the 12-step program, and by the end of the day, I was feeling pretty good. And that further reinforced for me that what I was feeling earlier in the day, the sense of whatever, that sense was temporary. And my fear related to it was more of a leftover of the past than warranted for what I was going through in the moment. So not only learning to identify what our feelings are, being able to put a vocabulary around our feelings gives us the opportunity to actually start to tolerate them a little bit. When you can't define what you're feeling, when you don't have a vocabulary for it, it's almost impossible to tolerate it, because you don't know what it is and you don't have any boundaries built around it. But if I can put some words around something, if I can define it, if I can say what it is, then all of a sudden I can also come to grips with the reality that it's not permanent, that it's not going to be there forever, and that there are things I can do, things that I am in control of, and things that I can do that will help me cope with those feelings while I'm tolerating them as they pass into whatever the next feelings are. So that's it for today. I hope you have a great day, and I'll be back here tomorrow for more.